you hear the phrase good news and you hear it so many times. And if you're in a Christian denomination, maybe you hear it a wee bit too much. Maybe you've come to the place where you're saying, yeah, the good news, the good news. I've heard that a few times. Or the gospel. That also means good news. To me, and I'm sure to you as well, the good news means something that's going to make you happy. So you're walking along the road and someone comes up to you and says, I've got some good news. Well, you're not thinking it's going to make my day sad or anything like that. It's going to make my life worth living and it's going to make me happy. And so if it doesn't do that, it's not good news, is it? So I'm glad we have this opportunity to have a little look at something called the good news. My bias, as you've already found out, is the book of John. And one of the reasons why I like the book of John is because it's actually my middle name. So how's that? But the other reason is I've read the four Gospels many times now. And what I love about John is it's just different. It's just different to the other three Gospels. There's a good reason why the other three Gospels are called the Synoptic Gospels. That is, they all have something in common. But John just kind of stands out as something different. Just the way it's structured, just the focus that John has in his narrative of Jesus's life has a different emphasis and different focus. And that's what I really like about the book of John. To me, John himself probably captures the idea of what the book is about. You've got John, he's this young lad, he probably doesn't have all the baggage of, religious tradition so much as perhaps the other disciples. And he seems to be the first one that captures who Jesus is and what he's about. And he's not called the beloved disciple for nothing. And of course, if you do, I'm not meant to go outside the four Gospels, but if you do carry on reading other works of John in the New Testament, you find that John has this really big focus on love and loving others. It's him that in his own gospel, in the book of John, where he's talking about love one another, that's the highest thing that we can have. So I love the book of John because it focuses on what matters. And in the book of John, Jesus isn't portrayed as talking about the kingdom. So the other gospels have parables, and it's always good to have a story. The other Gospels have parables, like the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, the kingdom of heaven is like a farmer, etc. But in the book of John, there's no gospel. There's tons of gospel. There's no parables. And that kind of is interesting because what John is doing is he's got Jesus turning around and saying, I'm not here to tell you about the kingdom. I'm actually here to tell you that I am the kingdom. And when you see me, you see what the kingdom is about. You see what real life is about and the type of life you'd like to have and the type of life that you'd like to grow within, to belong in to. Like, just imagine a community of Jesus's. That would be super cool to live in. Because, I don't know, if you read the Gospels, you soon discover a Jesus who has this really comfortable knack of being able to see into someone's heart and yet at the same time accept them and to grow them and to make them feel comfortable. And that's the kind of person I'd like to be around. And I have to say, it's the kind of person I'd like to be. The Gospel of John is structured on a whole set of miracles. There's 7. That's no surprise. So the author has structured the Gospel deliberately focusing on 7 miracles, and each one of those miracles, Jesus performs a miracle, and you all know the first miracle. That's the one where Jesus turns the water into wine at the wedding feast. And then after each miracle, people turn around and go, who are you? And it's like deliberately structured that way. And the answer is always Jesus coming back and saying, I'm the one. I'm it. on what you really want. In chapter 6 of John, there's a little thing going on there with the disciples and some of the rabbis. And if you want to have a look at chapter 6 and roughly verse 26 and on, so chapter 6 of John, verse 26 and on, you've got this dialogue going on between these guys that have followed Jesus from his miracle, where he's turned some, he's performed that miracle thing with the loaves. So he's fed this massive group of people, and these people have followed him over the other side of the lake, and they've kind of cornered him, and they're asking him some questions. And Jesus kind of turns around straight off, and he tells them, "Look, you've only followed me over this side of the lake because, like, I'm handing out food, and that's what you're here for. You want another handout." And he turns around and he says, "Well, really, I'm the food. I'm the food that you really need." And they turn around in verse 28 and they ask him this really funny question. They say, "Well, what must we do to do the works that God requires?" So that they recognize that true blues are going to behave in a certain way, and they're turning around and saying, "Well, what do we have to do in order to do that kind of work, to be like that?" And Jesus turns around and he says to them, "This is the work of God. This is what it is, to believe in the one whom he has sent." In other words, he's turning around and saying to them, "Believe in me." And you can almost, before you read on, get the impression that they're kind of saying, "Is that all? Come on, there must be something more complicated than that. There must be something harder than that." But Jesus is kind of saying, "No, there isn't. The only thing I want you to do is look at me and believe in me." And then Jesus goes on and he talks about a miracle. And he says, the disciples or whoever the group is here turn around and ask him, "Well, you prove who you are. You work some miracle. You make some sign, because like our heritage is, we were out in the desert. We were Israelites out in the desert. Our fathers ate the manna every day, and you've only worked this one miracle one day. That it may be 5,000 people, but it's not as good as what we have in our own heritage. So who are you? Prove it." And Jesus turns around to them and he says, "Well, actually, it wasn't Moses and the gang that did that. It was actually my Father in heaven that did that. And right now I'm here with you, and I'm actually the true bread." And then they say, "Give us this bread." And then Jesus says, "Well, this is the bread. This is me. You got to focus on me. I'm the one." And then the next thing, they start grumbling, because they're basically saying, "Well, that's not quite enough." It's a funny thing. I don't know if you've ever watched the movie Bruce Almighty, but there's a scene in it I really like. A scene where, so Bruce Almighty is a film where basically Bruce is the character, the main character, and he gets up one morning, everything's going bad, and he says, "God, I've had enough of this. I can do a better job than you." And so God comes along and says, "Fine, you do it. You do my job. I'll let you do it." And well, Bruce loves the power and he loves performing all these miracles, but then he starts getting into trouble. And there's a scene where God, who is played by Morgan Freeman in a big white suit, so you can imagine that, comes up to the carry guy, who's Bruce, and says to them, "So you're running into trouble." And he says to him, "The other day you were sitting in a restaurant and you had this bowl of soup in front of you, and you looked at it and you parted the soup, like Red Sea parting of the Red Sea, but he just did it in a soup bowl." And God turns around and he says to Bruce, that's not a miracle, Bruce. That's a magic trick. That's just a cheap trick. The real miracle is a single mother with two jobs trying to make a living and taking time out to take her kid to soccer. The real miracle is a teenager who says no to drugs and yes to an education. And I kind of think that's who Jesus is. He's not so much the miracle worker, he's the true miracle worker. He's the one who says that the real miracle is when you have this life, the true life that you really ever wanted. About 2 years ago, I was in hospital having a bypass. Okay, so I'm a real skinny person. Why should I have a bypass? Well, because my artery's blocked up. I've obviously been at Macca's too much. Whoops, that was an ad. I remember the whole experience vividly because I was in ICU for 2 days. I was worried about my own life. I actually thought during my time in ICU that I was going to die. I thought I was going to die before I even went in. And you know what it's like in hospital, noise all night. Anyway, Rosalie said, well, let's go for a walk. And I can remember it distinctly. We were walking down the corridor, down the John Hunter corridors, down out to the foyer. And as we were walking down the final corridor towards the door, I could feel these emotions coming up inside me and I started crying. I just started crying. And as I got closer to that door, I cried more and more. I couldn't quite figure out what I was crying about, but when I got outside, I realized what it was. I looked out and I saw a car park. Do you know how beautiful that car park looked that day? But I could see some grass and I could see some blue sky, and I went, oh, wow, this is a miracle. Life is a miracle. And I think we live so much of our life not seeing what's right in front of us. Here these disciples, these people coming up to Jesus saying, tell us how to get to the kingdom. Tell us how to have all this. And Jesus turns around and says, look, I'm standing right in front of you. You can see a real living example of someone that you can count as your hero, of someone that actually lives the kind of life that you really want to have and treats others the way that you'd like to be treated. And I think that's what we often miss in life. And as I've grown older, I've come to realize that the greatest thing that I miss is what's right in front of me. As I'm getting older, I actually learning to appreciate what's right in front of me, because I've spent so much of my life saying, tomorrow when I do this, tomorrow when I accomplish this, I will get there. But what really matters is right in front of me. And I think that's what Jesus is saying when he's saying about the good news. If you just look, you will see a miracle in front of you. Appreciate what's right in front of you. I also think that the righteous ones are really honest sinners. If you look at how Jesus was treating people around him, and you realize that he could see into their heart, the real people that were changed are the people who are honest about themselves and said, look, I don't have it all together. I'm on this journey. I want to be transparent and I want to be honest. So let's appreciate what's right in front of us. I think I might finish with a wee prayer. How's that? Dear Lord, we think about Jesus, and it's a picture that takes time to form in our minds, and maybe years it might take to capture who you really are. And I think we might be doing that for an awful long time. But one thing we do know is that there's these elements of what we really want for ourselves in our lives, for others around us. And you're basically saying to us, you don't have to work it up. You don't have to make it. You catch it by looking at me. So thanks very much, Lord. That's cool, the way you treat us. Amen.